Hey everybody, welcome or welcome back. Today we're gonna flex our alcohol ink painting muscles and do two different studies of the same subject. We're going to paint the Milky Way galaxy both on white paper and on black. So let's go. Alright, the first painting we're going to do is going to be on white paper. And just a side note, I'm using Nara synthetic paper here. If you are familiar with my alcohol ink related videos, talk amongst yourselves. If you're new here, you must know that the paper that I'm using, this Nara synthetic paper, is really the ideal paper for this kind of artwork. You can use Yupo paper, you can use photo paper, but it does not do the exact same thing because it's not totally stain-free. Nara is seriously like a glossy, plasticky substrate that really does not stain, not at all. You can paint today, not like it, and erase it with alcohol entirely the next day, and no trace will be left behind. So if you have to use a different kind of paper, just bear that in mind. You might have some staining going on, so you might have to be a little bit more mindful about your colors. So you can see I'm trying to leave a bit of an alley in the middle of my paper, and that's going to be where the Milky Way is, obviously. And while I absolutely can just let the ink run everywhere and erase that out after, that means that all of the ink that ends up in that area is going to get wasted, and I don't like that. So while I will do a little lifting and a little blotting later on with paper towel and stuff, for now I'm trying to keep the center avenue mostly clean, and that's just for the sake of not wasting ink. So I'm using my amethyst, my indigo, and my denim along the sides, and I've added a little bit of, what have I got here? Fiesta. I really like this one. It's a really beautiful magenta color from Ranger, and it's just super vibrant. You can see I only put what looked like a small amount, and it is just flooding the center of my paper with these amazing pink tones. So I'm doing this wet and wet. I'm only using my brush to move colors around. See, I'm not doing any fancy brushwork or anything because it's all gonna get melted together anyway. Any brush strokes that I make now are gonna get lost, so I'm not worrying about that. When it comes to wet and wet with alcohol ink, it never dries the same way that it looks when it's wet. So if you break your brain making beautiful brush strokes while the ink is still really wet and running on the page, you'll just have a broken heart later because it'll all change as it dries. Those brush strokes, gone. Alcohol ink is super diverse, and the difference between dry brushing and wet with alcohol ink are night and day. And I used to find that a little scary and intimidating, but honestly, I love it now because it's super versatile. You can do so many different things with it. Do you want this flowing, ethereal, trippy, unexpected formation of colors? Work wet and wet. Do you want something very specific where you can build certain tones and make, dare I say, a realistic painting? Wet on dry. A little dry brushing. Work with your dry palette. Use the technique that works the best for you. So you can see I've introduced some black here at the edges, and I'm just trying to get my black mixed in with the other inks, as it were, and flowing to the corners and the edges of the page like I want to. So I tip the paper to make the ink flow where I want it to, and I use a brush to guide it as well. This is really the kind of painting that you want gloves to wear. You don't want to do this without gloves. You'll get ink all over your hands. It's impossible not to because the ink has such a low surface tension. Since you're trying to get it to go to the edges, it will go off. You will get a little bit of ink on the back of your paper, and that's totally fine. But if it's all over your bare hands, that ink is pretty toxic, and it's also flammable. And I mean, full transparency, I've never set myself on fire with alcohol ink before, but I really am not keen to try it. You? So you notice I keep using my spray bottle because it dries so quickly, even when you got a lot of ink on there. The alcohol evaporates so quickly, I dare say instantaneously, that you want to have your spray bottle standing by to keep everything hydrated. Try not to go too crazy because, like I say, low surface tension, it will go everywhere. You don't want to have too much alcohol on there. But for example, if you want your ink to run down your paper, spray the bottom of the paper where you want it to run to. You gotta think about it, it's harder for the ink to crawl across a dry surface. So if you hydrate the paper with alcohol and then tip it so that the ink is at the top, it will run seamlessly down your paper instead of in these weird little broken runnels. And here I'm just using a paper towel to blot out a little bit of the center to clear up my my galaxy zone a bit. I don't want it to be perfectly clean. There's a lot of color in there. It's not white. So I'm using all the color that I've got in there and just blotting a little. This is part of what I love about alcohol ink. The push and pull. Lift it out, draw it back, flood it in, pull it back, and just see what it can do. It is so much fun. And it's also a great exercise as a painter. It's really cool to be able to practice like this. Alcohol ink is special. You can't practice like this with acrylic or with watercolor. Watercolor, what you put down is done. It's in there. It's in your paper. Yes, some lifting is possible, but not like this. You cannot push and pull with watercolor like you can alcohol ink. So use that. It's a strength. So here I can see the top of my composition has gotten really, really pale, and I really want to coax that beautiful dark ink closer there. So I've wet the top, and I just keep tilting my paper backwards and forwards to help flood that area with those beautiful dark colors. And as I go, I'll just clean out the center galaxy area with my paper towel just to keep it relatively dry, discourage the ink from wanting to run there. And I'm seeing that I just do not have enough color on here to fill up this beautiful sky, so I gotta get heavy-handed and add some ink to the top of my composition here and get melting again. Here I'm going in with the black ink, and I'm gonna paint in my tree line down at the bottom. So I'm painting in the tops of the trees first, and filling in all of the bottom edge of the paper. Once I've got that done, I'm gonna lift out a little bit more out of my galaxy and get ready to go in with some pink, which is one of my favorite parts. I love those little rosy, nebulous areas of the Milky Way, and that's one of my favorite parts to paint. I'm keeping my ink pretty wet here because I'm not really going for brush strokes, I'm more going for nebulous drips. I love the circular way that a drop of alcohol ink spreads on the paper, and that's a really great effect to push when you're doing space stuff, when you're doing water stuff, when you've got stars or clouds or bubbles. Push it. Think about the way that the alcohol ink wants to act. It wants to open in these little circles. Lean into that. When I feel like I really like my galaxy here and I'm ready to add some dynamic stars, I'm going to get out my trusty white acrylic paint and my shaggy old gel painting brush and splatter some beautiful stars on this. Yes, there are white gel pens and things that do technically sort of draw on top of alcohol ink, but honestly they are no match for the white brightness of that acrylic paint. They just don't do the same job. Plus there's something in the randomness of the splattering that really helps to recreate the randomness of the stars in the sky. It just works. Alright, time for round 2 on black paper. This is really going to be the lightning round, you'll see. It's so much faster because the majority of the sky is black and my paper is already black, so I don't have to work at building up the color over there like I did on the white paper. So I start off just by dribbling a little avenue of white ink all down the center where I want my galaxy to be. I use a little bit of denim close to the tree line and try not to incorporate too much white into it right off the bat because I don't want it to be too light, and I can always lighten it up as I go. I've dripped a line of amethyst ink all the way down each side of my galaxy, and I'm just kind of pushing that white ink out of the center and into the colored ink on the sides. I'm really enjoying using black nara paper, and I'm looking forward to using it more because it is so cool. Yes, the ink is the same ink, but with the incorporation of the particulate in the white ink, it's really amazing. It makes it more stable. It still has a low surface tension, but it doesn't operate exactly in the same way. It doesn't melt or dissolve as quickly. It doesn't move as quickly, and you can even achieve something like layers, which is really cool. And as I'm working on this study, as much as I loved the first one on the white paper, that was so much fun, I really enjoyed it. I'm liking this one so much more. I'm really enjoying the look of it. I love the color vibrancy on the black support. It is just so fabulous. Plus, I love that I can get some neat, brushy textures in the ink that are tough to do when you're only using the pure inks on paper without the white particulate. It gives it almost an oil painting like texture, if that makes any sense. It's difficult to explain, but I'm enjoying it a lot. One thing that I noticed that I have to be careful about, or mindful about at least, with the white ink on the black paper is that because of the particulate in the white ink, it actually takes quite a while to dry. It's thick and the particulate gives it surface tension, so the alcohol doesn't evaporate out of it as quickly. So in the areas, for example, in the center of the galaxy that are the brightest, I can't just load that up and expect the ink to dry instantly. I have to paint on the brightest areas and then give that a couple minutes to dry, almost like I was using acrylic or something, which is really interesting. Something else about the white ink is that it's not completely opaque right out of the bottle. It is pretty runny, which is great, but for the areas where you want to add a really dense white highlight, you really want to allow your ink to evaporate a little bit. I like to make ink spots on this black plastic palette that I'm using, you can see here. And I like to let them dry completely before I work with them because it gives me a super concentrated white, which means that it's very opaque. If I use the white straight out of the bottle to try and lighten up the center of my galaxy, it's not going to do it because there's too much alcohol in it, it's too diluted. But if I drip out some white ink onto my palette and let it completely evaporate and then go back and rehydrate it just with my brush, then my brush is full of concentrated particulate, essentially, and it will give me a very opaque look, just like the center of my galaxy right now. I could never have achieved that with the white ink straight out of the bottle. Now you may be wondering why I spent the black ink painting in the tree line down at the bottom. Like, why didn't she just paint in the top silhouettes of the trees and leave it at that? Well, that's because the black nara paper is not as nearly as glossy as the ink is. The alcohol ink, especially the ink with the white particulate in it, it's super shiny. So it's really clear when you've got a black silhouette that is extremely glossy and defined, and right below it is perfectly matte black, untouched paper. So you just want to do a thin washy layer of the black ink all over the bottom of your paper just to make sure that you have a little even gloss. It makes a world of difference. And here you see I've added my little stars just like I did on my white paper. I love this black nara paper so much. I can't wait to use it again. I could make the exact same study over and over. Maybe I will. Anyway, thank you for joining me. I hope you enjoyed this today. I certainly did. I'd like to do more of these side-by-side kind of studies and flex my muscles a little. So before we go, I'm going to show you my two studies side-by-side. I gotta say, I know I might be a little bit biased, but I really like the one on the black paper more. You let me know what you think.